Hi there folks, today's video is going to be, as promised, a kind of a basic starter solo using the minor pentatonic stroke blues scale. So we're going to quickly have a look at those two scales and then I'll show you the solo, we'll break it down and talk about a couple of techniques that we can use to kind of, make the playing of the notes more interesting. So it's certainly not going to be about how many notes we can fit in or how quickly we play notes. Obviously that's the kind of stuff that tends to impress, but more just about kind of, well, something that's basically can get you started on playing solos. Now, we're going to be using the A minor pentatonic scale. So I've got the scale up on the screen just now, up here. I have decided, one of the things that annoys me about guitar tab is the way that they have the kind of, if you look at tab, you've got the high notes are at the top of the tab and the low notes are at the bottom of the tab. But if you look at a guitar, the low notes are kind of on top of the guitar and the high notes are on the bottom of the guitar. Now, I would imagine that maybe tab is based something like music, where in music notation, the higher the note is, the higher up on the notation it is, and the lower the note is, the lower down. I'm not really sure, but so for my blues scale diagram, I've turned it round, so you can see that the pattern has the low strings on the top of the diagram and the high strings on the bottom of the diagram. So A minor pentatonic scale consists of 5 notes, hence the name pentatonic: A, C, D, E, G, and A, which is then repeated up the rest of the scale. So the scale diagram has 2 octaves in it. The lowest note, which you can see is marked in black, is the root note. So the root note of an A minor pentatonic scale is obviously A. Another A here, and another A here. Now, a pentatonic scale is quite spaced out. Like a major scale consists of 7 notes, and the 8th note, which is the octave. A pentatonic scale has 5 notes. So with a major scale, there are notes you can play along with chords in the same key as you're playing in that aren't going to sound great. The notes aren't going to match up too easily with the chords. In a pentatonic scale, because they're quite spread out, it matches up fairly much across the board. So you're pretty safe playing almost any note in a pentatonic scale alongside, say, so an A minor pentatonic scale, we're going to be playing a blues in A, 12-bar blues in A, and playing an A minor pentatonic scale along that. Now, as well as the A minor pentatonic scale, you also have the A blues scale, and the only difference is 2 notes. This note and this note. That note is a D sharp or an E flat, and it goes between the D and the E. Now that is generally played as a passing note, so it takes you, say, from E down to D through that note. It's not often, though you can do runs where you can include that note, but generally I have to say I would tend to play more pentatonic than blues scales, but that's just me, because that's kind of what I learned to do. And I'm not going to go too deeply into the whole musical theory of it, because A, I don't know, and B, I think at this stage it's about getting a feel for it. And I think one thing I'd like to say about scales is that it's very easy to fall into the trap with scales of learning a scale and then kind of only playing the notes in that scale. And ultimately scales are almost like you're kind of the skeleton of a body of music, quite like that. The skeleton, so it's the framework, but then on top of that, there are notes that you can play that aren't going to be in the scale that will sound good depending on what the chords are that are being played at the same time. So obviously in a 12-bar blues, you've got A, you've got D, you've got E. There's also a technique, I don't know if you've watched my video on the solo from Sweet Home Alabama. That little run there is not a scale, it's basically a D chord. And it's an arpeggio, and you're playing the notes of the chord one after the other very quickly. And that's also in, there's a bit of that in Sweet Child of Mine. And there are just notes that you can decide to put in that even, they don't fit into the scale technically, but they just sound good. So ultimately, I think if you want to learn to be a good solo player, you need to be able to build a tune in your head or build a tune over time. So you're playing along to a piece of music, you're working on a solo, and during that process, little things might happen. You might make a mistake. I've often found that I've made mistakes in recording music and then thought, oh, that sounds good, chuck it in. So it's a process of work, really, as much as inspiration. And the inspiration, I suppose, comes from practicing something and just trying different things and then deciding I like that, you know? An example I can think of is again in Sweet Home Alabama. That's a G major pentatonic scale nearly across the board. But at one stage, the guitar solo has a C in it, which is not in a G major pentatonic, because the chord being played in the background is a C. And so the guitar player who wrote that solo, which I think is a fantastic example of a really good melodic solo, stuck in a C rather than a B, which would be a note that is in the G major pentatonic scale. So don't think of scales as the answer to playing the right thing. It's basically, you know, when I work out, say, an Angus Young guitar solo for an AC/DC song, generally speaking, it'll be a major or minor pentatonic scale. But it's not always going to be that. So don't fall into the trap of just playing scales. And hopefully this lesson will give you a sense that you can take a few notes and make something sound pretty much halfway decent. So with that in mind, so the pentatonic scale, blues scale, with that extra note, which we're going to use in our solo, and then the 12-bar blues, which I've looked at in my previous two videos, which talk about 12-bar blues. So if you're not sure about that, maybe go and have a look at that. The 12-bar blues uses the chords of A, D, and E. 4 bars of A, 2 bars of D, 2 bars of A, 1 bar of E, 1 bar of D, 1 bar of A, and finish on an E. And we're going to be building the solo around that. But for this first solo, I'm going to try and keep it absolutely as basic as possible, and then I'll make videos where we look at little variations, and I'll add them to our library of videos so you can hopefully build up. So for this solo, we're only going to be using a part of the pentatonic scale. So again, up here, I've stuck up a diagram, a little box showing you the notes we're going to be using. So we're sticking around the middle here. Most of the notes are either on the 5th fret or the 7th fret of the strings. We don't go lower than the A string, and we don't go higher than the B string. And the only note that we use that isn't a 7th or the 5th fret is the 8th fret of the G string, which is the blues note scale. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll play the solo through, and then we'll break it down into manageable chunks. And it's, like I say, very repetitive, pretty much the same thing all the way through. So with that said, here is my lovely backing track, and here's my lovely guitar solo. One sequence of the 12-bar blues, and that's the solo. Now, I don't know if you noticed I made a slight mistake in the bit where I caught that string, but actually it sounded quite good. So if I was working on a solo for that and I heard that, I might be thinking, oh, I might chuck that one in. But anyway, so with that said, so you're playing an A, and this is an A note. So a good way to kind of create tension in a solo is to play a note that's not A and then play A after it to resolve it. And the most obvious notes for that are the notes that are above and below A. So C is the note above A in the pentatonic scale, minor pentatonic scale, and G is the note below. So that's the notes I'm using. So I'm starting off on the 5th fret of the G string with this note here, C. Now, I'm giving it lots of vibrato. And vibrato is when you shake your finger as you're playing the note. Now, in order to do that, I mean, you can play it with your hand wrapped around. I tend to drop my thumb back down and really kind of free my hand off the fretboard. I've got a little bit of contact between this part of my hand and the underside here just to kind of hook it. But by loosening off my hand, I feel I can get an awful lot more movement by using the other fingers to kind of add to the effect of the tremolo. Now, you can do tremolo side to side, but from what I understand from doing a little bit of studying for this video, that tends to be used by instruments without frets like violins, because that would make a difference to the sound of the note. If you do that on a guitar, vibrate that way, you're not changing the pitch of the note, but you can keep it going for longer because you're moving the string and you're keeping the vibration going. But if you do it that way, up and down, you can hear that you're actually altering the note ever so slightly. Now, with that said also, this is a minor C from an A scale. You could also play the C sharp, which is a note above it. And that would sound nice with that. But what I'm doing is I'm just giving it a little pull. So as I play the note, I pull down, and I don't think I'm bending it all the way up to there. And also the other thing about how you play a note is the attack. So that's how you're using your plectrum. So I've been kind of looking at my plectrum, yeah, I've been doing this, I've been staring at plectrum. I've been looking at my plectrum and thinking about my technique. I think I use my plectrum and my finger at the same time. So I don't have much of my plectrum exposed. It's not like I'm holding it at the top here with this much sticking out. I do think that's a hard thing to do, but I've seen people who can play like that. And your plectrum technique is really personal to you, and however it works for you, that's what you do. But I think I'm a very small amount of plectrum exposed in my hand, and then my first finger is kind of in the same place. And it feels to me like I'm using my nail and my plectrum at the same time. So attack is how hard you're hitting that string. So rather than just kind of going, you know, that real kind of, you're plucking it quite hard. There's also a thing you can do which is called a scrape, where you kind of run your plectrum across the deadened strings above the note. And by above the note I mean physically above the note. Obviously the notes are lower because you're strumming down the way. Like you kind of play down to the note, so that when you hit that note, you've sort of dragged your plectrum across a number of strings. And I'm doing that there to give that even more kind of bite to the sound of that. So I'm playing the 5th fret with my first finger on the G string, and then playing the 7th fret with my 3rd finger on the 7th fret of the D string. 1 finger, 1 fret is a nice technique to get into, where, you know, if you're playing across, say, 3 frets, or 4 frets, I should say, 1, 2, 3, 4, a finger per fret is a good habit to develop. Obviously, you wouldn't use it all the time. You might be using, stretching up to here, but it's a good kind of rule of thumb. So you want to be using your first finger and your 3rd finger there. So you're playing the 5th fret of the G string, the C, and then immediately coming down to that A on the 7th fret of the D string. And you're holding it and you're vibrating it. So like I say, I'm kind of finger up and down. Now this is going to be a hard technique to do at first. It's going to feel like pretty much impossible. A bit like learning to do pull-offs, where you're kind of using the strength of your finger to push down onto the note and then pulling off the note to make it ring. So, you know, that kind of Angus Young technique in Thunderstruck, where you don't need your picking hand to play that because you're pushing quite hard. Well, that's really, that takes a bit of time to pick up, and this vibrato is going to take you a bit of time to pick up. But just experiment with it. I mean, you can get some decent vibrato with your hand just held like that. Like I say, I would tend to loosen my grip, get my whole hand, and give it a bit of loudy. And you're also using your upper arm to get that vibration as well. So you play that 5th fret of the G string, 7th fret of the D string, and you hold that note. And then you're going down to the 5th fret of the D string, which is a G, and then playing back up onto that. Now that's a longer hold. And then hold it again. That's not a longer hold. They're about the same length. And you're keeping that note going by using a bit of vibrato. Now, if you find you can't, don't worry too much about it. Just do your best. As a beginning guitarist, it's very easy to beat yourself up about what you can't do. Just do what you can do, and it'll come with time. And the learning is you doing it, and you'll get the feel of what feels right. It's not like there's a magic bullet that's going to get you to where you need to go. It's just the experience of practicing and picking up things over time. A bit like natural selection and evolution. There you go. So now we play that lick 4 times. So we play it over the 4 bars of A twice. So you're going 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't count and play. 2 bars of A, and then you do it again over 2 bars of A. Then the backing track goes up to the D, but you're just playing that same riff again. Sorry, lick. I should say lick rather than riff. So you're playing that 4 times, and you're only going to change when the sequence gets to the E chord, at which point we're going to go up to the E note. So this is a D, this is an E, and so we're going to play that. So that's 7th fret of the G string up to the 5th fret of the B string. So 7th fret with your 3rd finger, 5th fret with your 1st finger, and that's over the E chord. And then to go down the D chord, you're going to take in this little blues scale note, and you're going to go, because you're passing from D down to E, sorry, from E down to D in the chords, so you're doing the same thing with the solo, but instead of going, you're using that note just to give it a little bit of tension. And then you play the same sequence of the, as you did in the beginning, which is the 5th fret of the, sorry, that bit from there. So you're going to go 7th fret of the G string, 5th fret of the B string, and then 8th fret of the G string down to the 7th fret. So you're passing down on the 8th note down to the 7th note and sustaining that for a bit. And then you're back to your 5th fret of your G string, 7th fret of your D string, and then to finish, because you go down to E at the end, you're going to do the 5th fret of the D string, and you're finishing on an E note, which is the 7th fret of the A string. So you're just playing 7, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, and chucking in that 8 there. Those are the only notes you're using. So play along with the backing track again, but I'm conscious looking at my screen there. I can see this is a 16-minute video, which is quite long. So I'll try and make the other videos shorter, because we'll just kind of build on this. We'll add little bits to it and all that kind of stuff. We'll develop a solo over a few lessons. And in the meantime, just practice. And if you're listening to the backing track, or I mean, I have an email address, cheapness@btinternet.com. If anybody wants a backing track, just email me and I'll send you a backing track and you can play along to it. It's my own backing track, so there's no copyright issues around like that. I'll stick the email address up here, and you can email me and I'll be quite happy to send you a copy of that backing track for you to play along to. And with that in mind, just keep it simple, just practice. And if you feel like adding anything in yourself, please do. You can see the pentatonic scale on the screen, and if I get any emails asking me for backing tracks, I'll send a copy of the scale pattern with it. And just try something, and if it doesn't sound good, don't do it, and if it does sound good, remember it and do it more. And that's pretty much how it works. So here's the solo one more time.